It's working hard.
Yep.
Should get the slide ready.
Okay, we are live. Josh, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Let me find my screen. There we go. Move you all over here.
And if you could also click on the hide button that's down below. There we go. Perfect.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for this session titled Comprehensive Tribal Energy, Climate, and Sustainability Planning. I'm Josh Simmons with Prosper Sustainably. We are doing energy, climate, and sustainability. People can't pronounce Prosper Sustainably, and I can't pronounce sustainability right now, I guess. So yeah, we've been doing energy, climate, and sustainability planning with Paula, Rincon, and San Pasqual and various tribes throughout the state now for several years, since 2014. And really excited to share the project we're working on right now related to one of the Strategic Growth Council Challenge grants, which we'll get more into in a moment. Prior to founding Prosper Sustainably, I was the environmental director for the St. Ines Chumash, and so I was participating just like you all were in these conferences back in the day, and have presented at most of them since then. But we're working on a variety of projects with tribes, in addition to planning microgrids and just grant writing, tons of other things as well. And you'll learn a bit more about some of that in today's session. Michael?
Hi, my name is Michael Burr. I'm the founder of Burr Energy LLC and Microgrid Institute, which is a consulting firm based in Minnesota. I founded back in 2013. Before that, I had about a 25-year career as an energy industry journalist, primarily. Career in 2013 or 2014, actually, when I was the editor-in-chief, I should say, and associate publisher of Public Utilities Fortnightly magazine, which is the industry journal of record for the investor-owned utility industry in the U.S. But since founding Burr Energy in 2013, I've worked on a lot of microgrid development and microgrid feasibility studies, especially community microgrids, and a lot of work with Josh Simmons at Prosper Sustainably, as well as all three tribes that we were talking about today, Paula, San Pasqual, and Rincon, on a number of microgrid projects, as well as other environmental, climate, and sustainability planning efforts. I've done a lot of grant writing, including with Prosper Sustainably, and I wrote the grant application for this. So I think that's why Josh wanted me to jump in today and help out sort of moderate this conversation. Glad to be here. So Shasta, could you introduce yourself?
I think by now everybody knows who I am, but just in case, I'll go ahead and do the formal thing and introduce myself. I am Shasta Gaughen. I am the Environmental Director and Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Paula Band of Mission Indians, Payam Territory in beautiful San Diego, California, and I am happy to be here to talk about our projects.
Great, thank you. Camille?
Hi, I'm Camille Merchant. I'm the environmental director for the Rincon Band of Indians, also near San Diego, and I'm happy to be here too.
Thank you. So John Flores unfortunately could not join us today. He had a conflict. But also I just wanted to mention, sort of to set expectations here at the start, we are intending for this to be a panel conversation and an interactive discussion with people in the audience. So we're really hoping that everybody who's participating, if you would please introduce yourself in the chat, and throughout the conversation, there's a lot of questions we're going to be pitching out for discussion. So I think I'm hoping that Josh will watch those questions and help moderate that part of it while I help walk through the presentation. But we're really counting on folks to chime in here and discuss. And frankly, we should go ahead to the next slide, Josh. We can start talking about the project itself that we started working.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing too is for all the speakers, if I'm getting the ongoing, so give us if we're not speaking, if we can just keep ourselves muted, just because I think there's a feedback there from one of us.
Right. sounds like some sort of digital artifact or something. It's weird. So I wanted to mention, well, I guess we'll get to that when we get to the project itself. So here's our agenda for the day. We're first all basically going to provide some background about this particular project that we're working on right now with Rincon, Paula, and San Pasqual. We'll get into that here in a second, and then we'll dive right into the process, the methodology that we are implementing in that project, and that brings in a lot of the experience that we've had working with these three tribes and others, looking at their goals and strategies, and doing some updating and comprehensive planning. And then, so that's sort of the meat of this conversation. We'll talk also specifically about joint planning, sort of some of the benefits and what comes out of that, and things to consider and methodologies for that. And then finally, we want to talk about planning templates and tools. That's actually part of the project, is to produce things that we can share. And we're hoping to get a bit of input planning to be able to share, to make sure that we'll prepare things that will be useful to folks. Josh, you want to move to the next slide? So just a bit of background on this particular project. It was funded by a grant from the California Strategic Growth Council and the California Energy Commission. Was funded last year. And this is, as you can, I'm not going to read this all for you here, but basically the point is to look at the different planning efforts among the multiple agencies of all three tribes that are focused specifically on energy and climate and sustainability issues. And review those, evaluate those, see where the gaps might be, and then to unify some efforts going forward in a more sort of programmatic way, using a comprehensive approach that will fill those gaps. You want to hit the next slide, Josh?
Just try to provide a little more context and background too, because I'm not sure it's covered. For the funding source, this was funded by the California Energy Commission and is being administered by the Strategic Growth Council, which kind of brought in the climate elements of this initiative. This is the same bucket of funding that's funding the California Clean Energy and Climate Change Gap Analysis that Prosper is actually the lead consultant on. Shasta is part of our team, independent of the Paula band. And ultimately, this type of planning effort is what the state is hopefully looking to fund more of, and that's what we're hoping some of the outcomes of that gap analysis project are for tribes that are participating, to identify their needs, their priorities, and the gaps in funding and advancing tribal clean energy and climate change priorities. So that today, we've had over 70 tribes participate. Hopefully we'll hit the 80 mark today as well. If you weren't aware of that, we have a website, caltribalgapanalysis.org. I'll share it in the chat with you as well. But we'll be actually releasing a draft report of that probably in sometime in the winter time, even for tribes that didn't participate. And we hope that it's informative for tribes outside of California as well, knowing that we have many in the audience here today who are not located within California. And the other thing I would just actually mention too is we've been engaged in both planning and implementation efforts in energy, climate, and sustainability with all three tribes. And part of the impetus of this project is that there's a lot of plans, there's a lot of strategies out there. And, I don't know if you all are experiencing that as well. We go through a lot of planning activities, and a lot of times things get sit on the shelf, or just you lose sight of what the priorities are, or there's so many priorities. When you have so many priorities, you really have no priorities. So, how, with the limited resources we have, the limited time that we have, how do we really keep track of everything, making sure that it's sequenced in a way that it's actually implementable, and you can prioritize what you're going to seek funding for, either from the tribe or externally to actually, I think at the end of the day, we are all we're doing this planning. Ultimately, hopefully we're doing the planning to make the change happen in the world that we want to see, to address the needs, bring the benefits to the tribes in these areas. And this was, so really the overall purpose of this kind of meta planning process was to bridge all those planning efforts together to make sure there's just ongoing visibility and better ongoing prioritization, similar to what the back in the day when I was working more on ETEPs, how ETEPs were, at least the framework that I developed were intended to kind of bring all the strategies and objectives together in a single place to guide an environmental department on an ongoing basis.
Background. Thank you, Josh. I wanted to mention that this task, or the scope that we're talking about here for this project, we've really just begun. So everything we're talking about here is kind of in real time with efforts that are starting to this point. So in some sense, the panel discussion we're going to be having here is actually informing this process in real time. So just to set expectations about that we're not really looking back at what we've done in this project in particular, but we are certainly drawing upon past work that all three tribes have done, and some of which that we've been involved with. Okay, so basically to dive in just a little bit on the particular scope of this project, it's essentially broken into different pieces, or two phases, and then a separate piece that's kind of consistent throughout. The first phase is really to work with each tribe separately, look at their separate needs and opportunities, and look at where their various strategic plans and strategies and goals are for energy, climate, and sustainability issues. And then to, once we kind of work through that process of evaluation, then work with the tribe to determine what are their priorities, where do they want to go from here. Once we've been able to sort of compile those things and figure out where the gaps are and the overlaps and maybe conflicts, then determine, what are the priorities for advanced planning going forward. And within the context of this project, there's some scope actually to do some of that advanced planning. In phase two, then we take the learnings that we've got from each separate tribe, and then to facilitate intertribal collaboration, look at mutual needs and goals and opportunities for planning together for mutual benefit. And likewise, to focus on what would be the priorities for intertribal efforts on those fronts. So then information sharing, as I mentioned before, we want to come out of this with some tools that we can share with folks, and that may be templates and worksheets, things like that. But that's what we really have in mind to start with is templates and some best practice outlines, more or less, to help folks to follow the kinds of comprehensive approaches that are succeeding, hopefully here. But we're also looking for some input on that, so we'll talk about that a little later in the conversation. I think that covers that slide. Unless anybody want to chime in on any of that, it's still kind of in the background phase here.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit. I mean, we are engaged with all tribes in planning activities on an ongoing basis, both individually and jointly. So I think to a certain degree, some of the advanced planning activities are kind of ongoing, whereas kind of the baseline, like broad look at all potential possible strategies out there for a community, that's kind of the effort that's starting just to ramp up right now. Really the intertribal piece, I think, was the particularly unique aspect of this that I think was particularly appealing to both the Strategic Growth Council and California Energy Commission, because most of the time, all the other projects are focused on an individual tribe. Due to the geographic location and proximity of Paula, Rincon, and San Pasqual, all being Northeast San Diego County, dealing with a lot, similarities among the activities and facilities on their lands, and it was part of what allowed for, let's not reinvent the wheel. Likely there'll be some consideration of the same strategies, opportunities, needs, and at the same time too, there also needed to be a relationship. So, we've been working with all three tribes, Prosper has, but, I think that, Shasta and John have known each other for a really long time. Camille, you've joined Rincon a little more recently as well. We've been heavily engaged in working with others at Rincon as well for a few years now. And, it was about bringing this opportunity to all three tribes, saying, likely going to be more successful on a grant proposal, but there'll be some efficiencies and there'll be some opportunities. I mean, ultimately, tribes being able to collaborate and pursue these strategies in working with potentially other tribes, working with the surrounding agencies, there's San Diego County, there's San Diego Association of Governments, there's a lot of other agencies that multiple tribes could maybe even be more effective in working together in trying to address some of the, in a lot of cases, external impacts, public safety power shutoff events, climate change. All these things are things that are actually occurring out, the source of that is outside of these tribal lands. And so, really to work together, we're actually seeing that this is stimulating some greater levels of tribes in Southern California, and we have some efforts going on building upon this particular project, and through this project to expand the scope to include many more tribes in at least some of these activities, particularly in the energy space.
Okay, so I think we're delving now into the part of the conversation where we're really getting to the nitty-gritty of the process, the methodology itself that we're seeking to pursue through this project. To do more comprehensive planning. So basically, I think it may be fairly straightforward if you think about it. You got to start with knowing what your baseline is. And that's really what task one is all about, assessing and prioritizing the needs and opportunities within the existing goals that have already been established. So really starting out by determining, where those, what plans exist, what strategy documents exist, what goals may exist that aren't necessarily in a strategy or a planning document. I mean, we've certainly seen some goals that have been set that may not make their way or haven't yet made their way into any kind of like comprehensive planning document. So those are all good things to make sure that we try to round up. And so that's like where you start, is to just to pull together and to try and make sure you have updated copies of all of those plans. Because things certainly do get updated as time goes by. And, sometimes you're working with an old version. Make sure we have the new ones. So also sometimes those updates are in progress or in pending. So we want to know where the status is, if there's something that is in progress or planned. And then once we look at all that, we can start to ask and work with tribal leaders to find out what are the most pressing needs at this moment that are within that universe of plans and strategies. And with that, we take that all together and compile, in effect, the whole library of existing planning documents and strategies and goals that have been set. We don't have to jump to the next slide yet, but the next slide will sort of build on that, sort of the second part of this first step. But before we get there, I guess I wanted to kind of raise a discussion question, and that is about this idea of plan fog. And Josh kind of alluded to it earlier. There's always lots of plans out there and different processes and strategies, and people get sort of strategy fatigue, and plan fog can certainly set in when you're trying to make progress on one given plan, and you might forget about another one. And there's a lot of factors that can be at play. It can be complex. So I wanted to sort of throw that out and talk about challenges in strategic planning. I'm wondering if Camille and Shasta might chime in just on this and sort of give us a reality check on this. Is plan fog a thing from your perspective? It's something we talked about in the grant application based on sort of what our observations are, but can you comment on that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's all sorts of fogs that we have to fight our way through as tribal environmental directors and environmental professionals. And I'll just add another sort of symbolic idea. And there's plan petrification, where it just sort of turns into a block of wood and sits on a shelf. And so that is probably one of the biggest challenges. And that's why I was so interested in this particular project, was that I'm tired of plans that become doorstops, and tired of plans that have a whole lot of overlap. And if you put them into a Venn diagram, there's pretty much, Rob just put in the chat, paralysis by analysis. In the Venn diagram, there's more overlap than there are just individual areas in terms of what these plans are meant to cover. And then for me, one of the biggest things that always occurs to me, and this is why this project, having our neighbors, Rincon and San Pasqual, involved, is I'm doing this plan for 13,000 acres. I mean, that's a small amount of land in the big scheme of things, and I'm responsible for about 800 people, 1,000 people who live in Paula. It doesn't make any sense for me to be building my own sort of fog, if we're going to stick with that. Makes me think of Stephen King's short story The Mist, where you don't know what's out there, you don't know who else is affected, because you're just in there by yourself. You're not looking beyond your own horizon. And my horizons here, from a geographical standpoint, are very small. And so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to be trying to navigate this by myself, which is why getting involved, not just with Rincon and San Pasqual, but hopefully in the future, other tribes throughout San Diego County and even up into Riverside County, I think is going to be the best way to lift the fog.
Thanks for those thoughts. Camille, anything to add to that?
You're muted.
I shouldn't be now. Can you hear me?
No, not you. Camille was muted.
Oh, Camille is muted.
I guess the other challenge is just to get everybody on the same page. That you have different departments with different goals, and you have, even within the same organization, you have different plans that overlap, that aren't necessarily pointing in the same direction. Exactly. So sometimes it's a challenge to get everybody kind of together and looking at the same things in the same direction, same time periods, and taking into account different components. You have different departments, you have different interests. So you have to put these things together. It isn't just really one point of view. You have to, make sure everything is coherent and everybody is kind of on the same page. And that can be a challenge too. So it works both ways, like you're a small island in a larger area, but you're also a small island with a whole bunch of different things going on just within the island. So it can hit you from both directions, I think.
Josh, did you have anything to add or see anything in the chat that you want to bring into this conversation here?
Nothing. I'll just, I think, even speak to what Camille's talking about. I've been heavily involved in Rincon energy project planning and project implementation, particularly for microgrids. And Camille and I haven't actually, I've been working with the tribe since early 2019, and we've only more recently started to interact more. So, in a lot of what we're talking about, it's like, it just, we're working with different entities, different departments, different people. And so, there really does need to be a merging of getting everybody at the table and ensuring that there is visibility, buy-in, and making sure too, there's not, you don't have conflicting priorities. I mean, to a certain degree, if you have conflicting priorities, well, they need to be resolved, and you need to bring in the leadership to help and provide the direction to resolve those priorities as well. I mean, you may have, a planning department that's focused on development, and then you have an environmental department that's focused on reducing environmental impacts. And so it's better to be more coordinated and get leadership direction and moving forward. Otherwise, you have two departments that may be going loggerheads at each other, and that can stifle progress all around for the tribal community.
If you want to go to the next slide, I think you jumped to it a little bit earlier. That's a table of, and I should mention, this is pulled directly out of the grant application from last year, so this is not actually up to date. But it kind of gives you an idea of where you kind of start, right? Taking a look at what what plans you have, and trying to identify where are the gaps. We did this for all three tribes that are in this particular grant application. Since then, some progress has been made. Some of these things have been updated, and we'll be working through making sure that we've got all that updated as we move through the project. But one thing I wanted to mention in particular, although Paula, I don't think has a strategic energy and resiliency plan in name necessarily, they do now, something like it. We did DOE options analysis, DOE funded options analysis that led to, in effect, what that is. So just wanted to point that out in particular, that I do know has been updated. And there's some other things that are underway. Paula and also Hamul, who's not in this project, but we're working with them on a transportation climate change adaptation plan and vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan. Vulnerability assessment put first, then adaptation. I just wanted to mention that because I think it points out that that some of the differences between tribes and the approaches that they've taken, and well, some have gone further ahead than others and dived deeper. Paula certainly has with regard to climate change assessment. So that is, underway at this point to go beyond the broader climate change vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan to focus really in on transportation and issues how of climate change affecting transportation and looking for resiliency in that area. Had some other notes I wanted to share on that, but I'll shut up for a second and let others chime in. Josh, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just, this is just a very short sampling of the types of plans you'll want to look at and consider. So, I would say there's even just maintaining an inventory of what plans are out there, where they are, when they've been updated, in of itself is a useful product for them to go deeper, which is what this project's going to do, is to extract all those strategies and put them in a single place, a single working document. And it's like, you may have these plans that are 100 pages long, but it's really the actual strategies, the on the ground things you're seeking to implement are probably a series of 1 to 2 to 3 sentence actions that can be put into a spreadsheet if you're willing to deal with a spreadsheet, but otherwise just put into a list. So with Paula, we've done a tremendous amount of we just completed that kind of, I guess, broader energy plan. There's been various feasibility studies that have been completed for various projects, which I think are relevant. So, feasibility studies are another area you'd want to focus on in addition to assessments. One thing that isn't as, so Rincon, on the other hand, has like a Rincon and San Pasqual, we're beginning to work with them on their climate change vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan. So while that's a none, there actually is a separate joint BIA tribal resilience grant program project that is going to get underway simultaneous with this project we're working on right now. But Rincon in particular has a master plan. So, there's other planning documents out there that you want to be aware of. Certainly the tribe's master plan for all of its lands is going to be something you're going to want to be looking at and considering all this as well. So just, make sure you're reaching out to other departments and asking them about what plans they may have. I would circulate this list to other departments and leadership just to ensure that you have everything covered. And then just have an ongoing list that hopefully just make accessible to everybody. So others can say, oh, I didn't know we had that plan. And, I think it's going to kind of just that step is probably going to lead to some greater coordination.
I want to jump in here if you don't mind, or I'm going to do it whether you mind or not. And just mention that, again, just even looking at this chart, I'm looking under Paul and I'm going, oh yeah, that's right. We do have that plan, don't we? Well, that's not great when I was the one who was responsible for developing those plans. And I'm thinking about Camille, who came into this position over the last, it's been like a little over 2 years, Camille? Yeah, and it probably was like, so what are the plans? Did anybody leave me a list of plans? And so, I know I did that when I came into this role. I mean, I've been with Paula for almost 17 years, but I started at the cultural center. So when I came into the environmental department 11 years ago, I was just sort of inundated with, well, here's this plan. And it was a dusty binder. I'm like, I don't even know what any of this means. I'm an anthropologist. How did I get here? But now, again, this is what we're trying to do, is figure out how to make these things accessible. And, what I'm hoping to see, if not with this project, but in the future, like I said, bring in some of our other tribes, especially when it comes to disaster planning, and just sustainability. But I'm thinking about climate related disasters, and we all know what they are, floods and fire for the most part. All of us who are on the 76 corridor, So Paula, Palma, Rincon, La Jolla, going all the way up into, Mesa Grande, Los Coyotes, Santa Isabel, all those folks that are in this northern San Diego County region, we should be planning together. So if there's a wildfire that affects our region, and we know now that, it sadly now a 500,000 acre wildfire is medium by California standards. We all need to be on the same page. So I know what Camille is doing, and Camille knows what Rob is doing, and Rob knows what Jacob is doing, and Jacob knows what Melody is doing. And that way we are all working together when it comes to these things that are affecting all of us at the same time. So that's what I really, really want to see. I don't want to be pulling the binder off the shelf when I'm seeing the flames out my window. I already want to know what to do.
Yeah, one more thing I'll add too is just think too about like all tribes are funded to develop these hazard mitigation plans. I mean, how much of that is really overlapping the vulnerability assessments and adaptation plans as well? It's like you kind of have two different departments doing a significant amount of the same planning in silos. I think is probably something you had on a different slide, Mike, or making that point. And so, breaking those silos, not just like Shasta mentioned, not just within a tribe, but also between tribes as well. When you're dealing with the same impacts, you're also dealing with the same resources. I mean, most of these tribes, Shasta just mentioned, I think maybe all of them are in San Diego County, and their intergovernmental relationships and sharing of resources during these events that probably would be better to be coordinated. Otherwise, there might be some level of competition going on for these resources. And so, just kind of coordinating, ensuring that you don't have the county trying to provide the same services to various tribal communities and, in a competitive manner.
Do you want to add anything? Yeah, she's muted and sounds like she's saying maybe not. I'm not sure. Yeah, and I think we can move ahead, but I did
annoying mute thing. No, I'm fine. I think that's correct. I mean, I agree with that. I don't know if I could add anything more.
Okay. One thing I did want to mention is that, with some of this, other than the FEMA funded hazard mitigation plans, things like that, there isn't necessarily magic to, what the name of the plan is or what exactly it has to cover, right? It's what you need. In some tribes, as you've noticed, there's an energy sustainability and resiliency plan. Well, it doesn't need to be, a resiliency plan can be a separate thing, right? It really just kind of depends on what the tribe needs and wants. I just wanted to make that little point. If you want to move ahead, Josh, I think we can move to the next slide. Okay. So the second piece of task one basically is we've already been talking through. I think a lot of this basically is just trying to figure out what the key goals are and find out what's omitted, right? First and foremost, I think, like if there are gaps in existing plans, or if there are plans that really need to be done, we need to identify those in this process. And then also, I think when we go through this process, looking at the plans, we get an idea of how different plans might have been performed by different people in different ways with different drivers, and you end up with different results, right? And they may or may not really be all that consistent with one another. They may have conflicts among them, as people have already talked about. And one thing, I think that we have to acknowledge in a process like this is you need to be objective about, what plans have accomplished and what they haven't, because all plans are not created equal, right? I mean, at the end of the day, so you look at some plans and you think, well, it's, there's really a bunch of things missing. It's kind of incomplete. It's not on point to what the tribe really wants to accomplish. So you need to identify those things so that we can fix it. Just figure out what those how to go forward, whether it's something that needs to be fixed or not. Another thing I think somebody alluded to, Camille mentioned, is the idea of different plans and different timelines. That goes to the point of how plans are interdependent. Progress on one or lack of progress on one may hinder progress on another, or we've certainly run into that in some cases where, like, we need a master plan update in order to make a siting decision about a project that's going to affect resiliency. And that can hold up progress in another area. You know, which isn't to say pointing any fingers or anything. It's just there are different timelines, right? There are different efforts on different timelines. And I've certainly run into that a lot in a lot of different contexts, that like a community, whether it's tribe or not, might have certain goals and like they want to try to accomplish something, but it takes a while to get a plan done. And in the meantime, things change, right? And so now that plan is out of date. It's helpful to just like step back, get an idea of what they're, you know, how they're related to each other. And, you know, then you can get a better idea of where you need to really maybe focus attention on moving some things forward to break any log jams that might be there. So that's, you know, this kind of comes to the end of this first task, and that is a summary, a report really that has a comprehensive evaluation of all the existing plans and goals to, you know, identify all these gaps and potential conflicts. And I think we talked about this question a bit, the silo planning concept. And I'm curious if there's any sort of real world examples or anything people can add to this conversation about, you know, how that affects outcomes when there are different people and different agencies working sort of separately. And also the question I think comes up is how are you working, or how have you seen that barrier been overcome, right? What approaches have worked for you to try to overcome that? That's a question that I've got. I think that may be a practical one that we're going to run into. So I'll open that up to the panel. And I don't know if Josh, you can watch the chat and see if anybody has any addition.
Well, I'm going to jump in and just say, hey, if you're watching and listening, get your butts into the chat and start giving us some feedback. I know you're in the post-lunch doldrums, but that's no excuse, because we want to hear from you as well. But you know, it's funny that you asked the silo question, and I'll be honest too that I hate that corporate analogy now. It's just I'm tired of it. I want a new one, but it also is useful in giving us the idea of what we're talking about. I also want to know, are we talking about a grain silo or a missile silo? Because I prefer a missile silo. Thank you very much. But my example actually isn't from my department per se. It had to do with our IT department and our GIS department working on the same project at the same time with no knowledge that either one of them was working on it. And so once they both kind of realized it, it was sort of a, wait, you're doing this, but I thought I was doing this. How come you're doing it? And they were doing it in different ways. And it had to do with somewhat with stuff that's important to me, but it had to do with the maps on our reservation. What are the addresses? What in Google, when you go to Google Maps, you know, some stuff was misidentified. Like we have a Wells Fargo bank branch in our tribal admin building, and the little location doohickey flag for it was showing up like in the middle of somebody's allotment somewhere across the river. You know, so you don't want people trying to go to Wells Fargo at a tribal member's house. And GIS was working on that because it's maps, and our IT department was working on it because it's kind of an IT related thing, and never the twain shall meet. So that was a waste of resources. It was a waste of effort. And part of our own emergency planning here in Paula, or in the environmental department, was to do something about the inconsistency in the addressing, so that when first responders have to come out, they aren't driving around all the dirt roads trying to figure out where's the house that called 911 about, you know, a heart attack or a diabetic emergency. So, you know, we have to all work together on those things, and not just with the Paula Fire Department, but we have cooperative agency agreements with other emergency response agencies. And so even though the Paula Fire Department might know where so-and-so's house is, if it's Deer Springs or Escondido or even Rincon right up the road, they may not know. So there's an area where the silos are not only annoying, they could be deadly.
Great points. Camille, anything to chime in on?
I know that we've had issues where, say, our general services department, our utility department, and our environmental department have both been working on improving the mapping of the utility systems at the same time, but not together. So we have different things going on that may actually overlap a little bit, and some of it may have different accuracies and that sort of thing. So, yeah, there's a lot of communication that needs to occur. And sometimes, even despite your best efforts, you're like, well, this is a mapping effort. Oh, no, this is about our utilities department. Like it makes sense to each department in their own way. And so they don't really see the conflict, even though there is a conflict, until they actually find out that we both have contractors running around at the same time doing different projects. And it's like, well, wait a minute. So those things happen. And there are kind of some joint efforts that are sometimes needed and kind of desired, because maybe you have input from both sides of things that end up giving you a better product. So, it isn't always, well, mine is better. No, mine is better. So it is kind of good to be able to discuss these things.
We're hoping a sort of comprehensive approach will help to maybe bridge some of those gaps, you might say. I'm looking at the clock here and realizing we've used up a lot of time, and we're going to run out. So we should probably try to move forward a pace here. I think there's a lot of examples we could point to of that. I agree, silo is sort of I don't know, overused term, but there's a lot of examples of where that can lead to inefficiencies and lost opportunities, actually, as well as danger issues, safety issues. So moving into task 2, I think it's really all about looking at what are the new goals. It's partly now we know where our gaps are and where our blind spots or problems might be. Also, we're looking at what's the new strategic guidance that might be needed, what new planning efforts need to get underway. That I think it's important to prioritize those things, because as we've been talking about, you can spend all your time planning and not really get anything done. There is a lot of plans out there already, but you need to ultimately prioritize. And so it's really what we're in this process, in this project, we need to work with each determine really what are the priorities, and try and force that issue, even though everything sometimes seems like a number one priority. Really need to determine what's urgent, right? And I think a couple of other points on this slide to make, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like a lot of times existing plans work as a template, or they'll provide a lot of input and ideas about how to address things and maybe how not to address things. You can look at plans and decide, well, that's not where we want to go, or it isn't really what I want to see, and that's instructive as well. So it's really helpful to look at what other tribes are doing, and that goes to what we're doing here too, is bringing it all together, getting an idea of what each of the 3 tribes have done and what approaches they've taken can help us to replicate what can be replicated in an easier, quicker way. Another key point that we've run into before, when we're applying for a grant requirement may be to have a certain plan in place that maybe isn't in place, or to have established a goal, or in order to score highly, you need to say that with this project is fulfilling a goal that's been established. Maybe it hasn't, and in the process of writing that grant, you go to the tribal council and say, we need this goal, can you establish it? And they will, right? So it's helpful to do that in advance rather than waiting until you find out, oh gee, there's a grant deadline coming up and now we need to scramble. That, I think, my question for the panelists here is, have there been situations where that sort of scrambling has happened? I've seen that happen, but as far as I can tell, the results of those have been useful, actually. But I'm wondering if you've run into situations where something's been, for want of a better word, sort of cobbled together quick, or come up with quick, whether it's cobbled or not. And ultimately you have to go back, or you want to go back and revise that, revisit it. Have you run into situations where that's been needed, where you came up with something quick and you needed something better ultimately?
Michael, just so you know, we have 5. I'll go ahead, chat. We only have 5 or 6 minutes left, and we still have other tasks to cover. So I think we need to kind of breeze through the rest
Okay.
of the chest. It looked like you were about to add something.
I was just going to say that, looking at that question, would plans be more useful if they were created systematically instead of on a deadline? Yes, but if I don't have a deadline, they're never going to get done.
Double-edged sword there, I guess.
I mean, I'll add, I mentioned this yesterday in the microgrid session. Sometimes it's actually helpful to develop your plans in response to anticipated grant applications. I mean, ultimately, when you're preparing a grant application, you're developing a plan for a program or a project. And so you can use, I think it's very justifiable to use funding right now to do planning to actually work on grant applications. And sometimes, GAP grant can support developing grant applications themselves, but like this project we're working on right now is actually we're using it to develop doing some planning activities around some grant projects that are actually stimulating the planning that needs to occur in order to make those things a reality. So I think it's worth kind of. One other thing I want to add to is I think it's just, there's the plans themselves and identifying gaps, and there's some ground truthing that needs to occur. So I think it's always important in the very beginning at the kickoff meeting for the leadership and the key stakeholders, just say, what are your highest sustainability priorities and needs? Just because, if you don't ask the question, you just rely upon the plans. And I say, ask that before you present the actual plans and strategies that are out there, just because, start with a clean slate, just to make sure that what is on the top of their mind is actually captured before you get too far down the road. And, they focus on seeing as opposed to what would already just be in their head as well.
Great points. So I think you're right. We're pretty much out of time here, but I think we can briefly touch on prioritization planning. It goes to the same point we've made a couple of times. What's most urgent? And where's the low-hanging fruit? What can we do now that's going to facilitate progress to move forward, in a way that's going to really provide results for the tribe? That'll be part of task 3, really to come up with some recommendations, talk to the tribe about the priorities, and try to come up with recommendations for advanced planning to be jumped on right away. I think maybe it would be best to jump to the next slide, unless somebody has an urgent burning. Nope. Okay, let's move to the next slide.
I'm going to just mention one thing too. It's just like in this process of developing a tool that's like a live tool, a living tool, just because your priorities are going to change, your progress and actually implementing is going to change and need to be updated. So I think having a tool that has just the strategies listed, that you can even just update dates and status and roles and responsibilities. You can, the best laid plans of mice and men, I think is, as the saying goes, like you're not going to accomplish everything you set out to do, but keep pivoting, keep adapting along the way and adding in new strategies and priorities.
So I think we're close to the end here. We're about out of time, so it's a good thing. So basically, to talk about joint planning a bit, which we've already been talking about quite a lot, I think it's clear that joint planning produces a lot of benefits. Including borrowing from each other's experiences and learning from each other. It's also about producing joint plans that ultimately can lead to joint projects that produce mutual benefit. And some of those things can be very exciting, some things that can really make a big difference that wouldn't happen if you didn't cooperate with neighboring tribes. So we're seeing some of that now, working on some very interesting things. And we're going to run out of time. I wanted to just see if there's any.
It'll let us go over. It won't throw us off, Michael.
I wasn't sure because I saw that timer going to tick out and
so
going to cut us off. I didn't know. Right. So on this point of joint planning, what other folks have to say about this? I think we've talked about a lot with regard to this already, but what ultimately, what else can be gained from it, or what? And that's one thing I wanted to ask. What do you see, Camille and Shasta? Do you have any particular? What do you see as a particular opportunity that may come out of joint planning?
Better allocation of resources and less overlap in the process, and less siloing, if I have to use that odious term.
Yeah, and maybe more synergy so that you end up having different activities kind of helping one another along so that you can plan and schedule more advantageously. So I think those things come out of it, as well as I think it's important to revisit a lot of the planning, a lot of the plans regularly to make sure that your targets haven't changed, that situations haven't changed such that it changes your priorities. Because I think there is some danger in having old plans and old priorities, and it's important that it's kept fresh so that you're not pursuing something that isn't as important as it was initially, and that your resources could have been allocated better, sort of thing.
Great point. One thing that had occurred to me as well, there might be I don't know, it might be easy to think, well, gee, if we're starting to collaborate, it starts to sound like, well, we're relying on each other. And is that consistent with sovereignty and self-reliance? Well, I mean, maybe that's a dumb question. I think it obviously can be, right? Or should be. It seems to me that ultimately if planning processes and overall processes are improved, that's going to lead to better sovereignty or strengthen sovereignty. So it's kind of a strength in numbers thing is the way I would look at that.
Yeah, for sure. It's part of the sort of the overall concept of federalism. I mean, the states can make decisions for themselves, tribes can make decisions for themselves, but we still work together on those issues that are of importance to all of us.
Yep, great point. Okay. Go ahead,
maybe I'll just leave it on kind of an inspirational note as well, because sometimes it's like we're kind of talking in generalities a lot here, but I just as some tribes that we're working with are already aware of this. This effort's actually leading to really significant collaboration among tribes in Southern California. We just submitted an EDA grant proposal for the Southern California Tribal Accelerated Clean Energy Economy Initiative. Actually rose out of just this partnership between these three tribes, and then reaching out through the greater consortium that includes both local and utility scale clean energy facilities, workforce development, advanced demonstration, electric vehicle, mobile charging station projects, and a facility that's going to serve all tribes in their ongoing energy-related planning. I mean, the impacts and the resilience needs relating to energy are affecting all tribes throughout Southern California. And so, this is kind of a moonshot project, or, at some point, hopefully we will be presenting about this exciting project that we just, put out there in the world. But just so you know, it's not, this isn't spinning our wheels. Like, this is leading to some very tangible and perhaps even not just nation leading, but world leading initiatives that can occur out there. And if you don't kind of create those bridges and develop that ecosystem and those connections, then you're kind of your limitation of both the opportunities and the benefits is going to be just limited to the boundaries potentially of just your tribal community and its land. So I'm excited about that, and hopefully next year we'll be presenting on that exciting initiative as well. But hopefully this has all been helpful for everybody, and just kind of getting a sense of really I think something to consider, not so much just starting your own meta planning process, but even on your individual planning processes, considering how to make them more effective and ensuring you don't have gaps in greater synergy between yourself, the departments, and throughout the community that hopefully will lead to better benefits for everybody.
Well, Josh, I know the lady who's planning next year's conference, so I'm sure that she'll accept your proposal to present on that great project.
Awesome. Okay. Hopefully up in Tahoe.
Yes.
Time we'll actually get up there.
Yes.
Josh, you want to hit the final slide? And it's really just about information sharing. So I think at this point we're out of time for sure.
Yeah,
and
we are.
Over. But if folks have suggestions for anything in particular that they would like to see come out of this, we'd be open to hearing those ideas. But basically, what we're trying to produce is some templates and tools that would be useful, as well as I mentioned before, sort of planning outlines, so we can share the methodology and what was most successful that other folks might be able to build upon. I think that wraps it up. Any other final words?
No, just thank you both, all three of you, for being here. And John can, you know, suck it. John is really important. He just, yeah, he had to go do something something else at the same time. So thank you everybody for being here. Look for the recording if you want to share this with others. The PowerPoint is in the details for this session, and yeah, that's it. We're going to stop the broadcast.
Good. Thanks everybody. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.